Welcome to Holyrude Ungagged, the wee Heidi of political podcasts. Season 7, Episode 2. I am your host, David McClement, broadcasting from the Blantyre Free State. And this week we have Mother of Holyrude Dog of the Year winner, Heidi, the pride of Mulgai. It's Debra Torrance.
Hi.
Welcome, Debra.
Am I the pride of Mulgai or is my dog?
You.
Thanks.
But she will inherit that title when you pass.
Okay.
God, that's a bit morbid already. off to a bad start. And the third edge to our triangle tonight, journalist, activist, Republican socialist, and Dundee's favoured son, it's Connor Beat.
Hi, David. I might not be Dundee's favourite son for long, though, because it does seem like I might be moving to the Central Belt soon.
Ooh. I thought you were going to say that somebody else was moving to Dundee to usurp you. It's just because you're leaving.
Yeah, I know.
Whereabouts in the Central Belt?
Probably Edinburgh.
Without doxing yourself?
I could probably say Edinburgh. It's a big enough city.
Oh, the worst bit of the Central Belt.
Said like a true West Coaster there, David.
That's us lost half our audience. So how have you been? How's things? Did you have a nice holiday weekend?
It was quite nice. I was going to go camping on the weekend, actually. I was going to take this opportunity to go camping with my partner because she's never been camping before. But the weather, it was a bit overcast and we were a little bit skeptical, so we ended up not doing it. So not very exciting, but...
Did you do anything that would be interesting to people listening to, say, a podcast?
I went to another escape room and got steaming. Like not in the escape room, after the escape room. And
I was going to say you were clearly successful because you're here.
Yes,
you're not broadcasting from a escape room.
Yeah, it wasn't as exciting as the last one. It was more highbrow. So it would just let the most intelligent people of the team carry us. It was a lot of like, what do you call that, blacklight, where you had to look at pictures and decipher a code and all that. And it was a lot of effort.
I've never done an escape room. Never done one.
They're fun.
No.
I was skeptical when I first done it. I didn't really want to do it. I thought it was like a trap. Like they're going to trap you and then you have to pay extra money to get out or something. I don't know. I just
saw too many horror films that started like that.
Living in Britain is basically just like being in a gigantic escape room anyway. So
exactly.
I don't know. I've never went to an escape room and I kind of feel as if it's 50-50. Either I'd absolutely love it or I would just hate it so much.
How was your weekend, David?
Yeah, it was all right. Cats have been fighting a lot. That's been a bit of a drama. Don't know what's going on. I mean, there's 3 cats. The middle one gets on with both of them, but the youngest one and the oldest one have never been that warm to each other. But they're all sort of hissing at each other, and we caught them having a proper barney the other day as well. So the working theory is that because my youngest is potty training, so he's had a couple of accidents around the house, they're all in high alert because they think there's some predator appearing and marking the territory. So hopefully it calms down when he stops pissing in the corner.
Yeah. Have they joined in the pissing?
They haven't yet, thankfully. Hopefully they won't.
That's the next stage.
There was more drama actually today because my youngest daughter, who's in P1, she came running out of school and I don't think it was show and tell, but it was something like that. And she had taken her 11-year-old sister's diary in for her show and tell. So her sister was not best pleased to find that out when she came out of school.
That is like a supervillain origin story. But I don't know what child is going to be the supervillain.
It's like something out of a bad teen drama.
I couldn't be a teacher because I would be too tempted, just to watch that unfold for the drama.
See how it
instead
goes.
Of intervening and saying maybe I shouldn't let this happen. Reading passages. Used to be one of my favourite radio shows actually on TFM. Used to be in the morning when we were driving to school. It would be a guy reading out excerpts from his diary when he was a teenager, and they were all woeful, horrible, like the most embarrassing stuff. I couldn't do that.
I opened the book and I obviously didn't read it, but I read it enough to realise what it was. And the opening line was, this book is going to be so cringe. So I hope she was wrong, but yeah. So she took it better than I thought. I thought her wee sister was in big trouble, but she kind of shrugged.
Villain origin story.
I've also been binge watching Superman and Lois on the iPlayer.
I thought you said Superman in Lewis, like it's some sort of like Western Isles version.
Yeah, it's that kind of Elseworlds thing. We had Superman Red Sun where he was in the Soviet Union, and now this is one where he's in the Outer Hebrides.
Yeah, even grimmer.
But it's quite good. I'd heard about it, but it's better than I thought it would be. Superman with two teenage sons.
Never seen that.
So check it out. I'm guessing it's not that big a hit because, well, it's an American show, but it's on iPlayer, and usually BBC only get the ones that Sky and like don't want to bid for, and there's like 3 seasons of it before it's made it over here. So guessing no hugely popular, but
I hadn't even heard of it, to be honest.
yeah.
Who's the Superman?
I don't know how to pronounce his second name. Tyler Hoechlin, something like that.
I don't know him.
He was in Teen Wolf, the Teen Wolf TV show that was out a few years ago.
I didn't see that either.
Do you remember the Supergirl cartoon? No cartoon, TV show.
Yes.
He was the Superman in that.
All right. Okay. I think
it started a spin-off, but Supergirl's not involved at all. So I think it's like it started off as a spin-off of that character, and then they just decided, no, this is another Superman that's just played by the same actor.
Just looks the same. I don't know if you already mentioned it in the last episode, which I sadly missed, but have either of you watched Shogun?
yes, it's good. No
Yes.
spoilers.
No spoilers. Okay.
All right, well, that's takes away what I was going to say. I did enjoy it. I thought the ending was a bit weird. I'll leave it at that.
I thought it wasn't what I expected. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But, I just think the premise is fantastic. And who doesn't like to see, sectarianism unfolding in a strange Japanese context? What unites Portuguese and English people in 1600s Japan and like old firm football fans?
Just another set of islands off the coast of the Eurasian continent.
Yeah.
I do
More
like
similar than you'd think.
I do like Cosmo Jarvis. He was doing an excellent Tom Hardy impression through the whole series, I felt. As if somebody went to him and said, look, we really wanted Tom Hardy, but we can't afford him. Is there any chance you could just do a Tom Hardy through it all? And he does a pretty good job.
I always think he resembles, that woman who tried to touch up that mural of Jesus and she kind of just blurred his face. I think he looks remarkably like that. Get up if you go get a picture
of the woman or of the mural?
Of the Jesus, of the
the original or the retouched one?
The retouched Jesus.
Oh dear. Yeah. That's not a compliment.
It's strange though, because he's not an actor, he's a musician. So I'm surprised that he got one of the lead roles in such a heavy TV show. But he must have impressed somebody. I heard of him for the first time when it was Patrick Harvey was on, I don't know if it was Desert Island Discs or if it was just something similar concept, and he picked one of Cosmo Jarvis's songs, the Gay Pirate song, which I would recommend. It's an excellent song. And on that note, let's get ungagged. No surprise, no prizes for guessing what's first up on the agenda. It's been quite a choice for us to move to a fortnightly schedule, just as the whole of the political scene in Scotland explodes. But that's what happened. Humza Yousaf has officially now resigned as Scotland's First Minister. The now former SNP leader announced his intention to quit last week, following a bitter falling out with his Scottish Green colleagues in government. Yousaf had ended the Butte House agreement with the party and sacked its 2 leaders from the cabinet ahead of a vote by Green members that could have ended the deal. Co-leaders Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater reacted furiously to the shock news and pledged to move against the now former First Minister in a no-confidence vote. During his resignation speech last Monday, he said it had been an honour to serve as Scotland's first person of colour to hold the role of First Minister. Debra is our token SNP person. Would you like to go first?
Why not? Well, we were editing the podcast when everything the Scottish political scene just changed like that on a whim. I don't know if that's fair to say a whim, but I just feel like the decision was so myopic. I still can't believe what happened. And on the Monday, we were in Holyrude for Heidi's Holyrude Dog of the Year when Humza was resigning. And it was eerily quiet, to be honest, because all the journalists were across at Butte House, obviously. So it was a bit weird. And I watched it in the office TV. And to be honest, I felt emotional, but also like Humza didn't have any other choice. I think he sort of made his own bed, so to speak. And I can't believe that it went down the way it went down. What do you use? Like for somebody within the SNP, for me, it was just like, what is going on? It was a bit of a shock. So I don't know if I've even fully articulated my full range of emotions because it was like that meme, that office meme. You know the one I'm talking about where they all run through the corridors.
Oh, I think that is The Office.
Well, that's how it felt in my brain. I was like, what is going on? Checking all the sources. It was just wild.
Connell?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what this means for Scottish politics, all this. I think it's still it's a really complicated thing, and I think all bets are off. So I don't really trust anyone that's giving a clear prediction of how it's all going to unfold. In terms of Humza Yousaf standing down, I think I'm not an SNP voter or supporter or member or anything. I still felt a tinge of sadness, just because, I mean, he's been the most senior politician in Britain to speak with such moral clarity about what was happening in Gaza and what is happening in Gaza, and that is, it's kind of the result of just bizarre coincidences. He's only first minister for a year, and it happened to overlap with the genocide that's happening, and so that meant he was able to, provide a huge platform to talk about what was happening, and also make sure that the Scottish government maintained its support and it didn't cancel its funding to UNRWA like so many countries have. And actually, of the countries, so many countries have since reinstated funding, including Germany, which is one of the most, one of the strongest supporters of Israel and one of the biggest suppliers of military equipment to Israel. Even they have reinstated funding, and the UK still hasn't. And I think that is important just to recognize how bad the political discussion about Palestine in the UK is. And also because you could see the amount of racism that was thrown at him just daily, and I think he's referred to that in Parliament. I still have arguments with people about the speech that he gave 4 years ago, highlighting the fact that there are very few non-white people in the most senior levels of government and civic society in Scotland, and that is just thrown at him constantly as evidence of some sort of anti-white racism, which is just such a ludicrous thing that I can't believe that I have to argue about it all the time. Like, it is a lot of people who really believe that, and they see it peddled on social media. And so even though I think, if it wasn't for the bizarre coincidence of Gaza, if it wasn't for the fact I feel a lot of empathy for the situation he's been in with racism, his term was kind of underwhelming, and it was marred by some big mistakes, including, for example, the council tax freeze, which is leading to a huge amount of cuts at a local level. The news about the green targets being missed or being scrapped because they're going to be missed, really unfortunate stuff. I do feel like it's hard to see how Swinney navigates this better, because there is the fact that in terms of the Butte House Agreement, there's so much of it that has been obstructed, not by the SNP, but by the UK government. So we haven't had an independence referendum, obviously, because of the UK government. We haven't got a bottle deposit scheme because of the UK government. We haven't got a gender recognition reform because of the UK government. And you can just imagine all these other things that are going to get obstructed by the UK government. So, the ability of the Scottish Parliament to actually do progressive things has shrunk. But there's going to be such a big job for John Swinney to do to actually reverse some of that trend and show that the Scottish Parliament can deliver something that's positive for people in this country. I don't know that I expect that to happen. Again, I'm saying all bets are off, but yeah, I do kind of feel, I feel a bit sad at how things have unfolded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just bamboozled was the word that kept popping into my head. Like, is it all unfolded? I really like Humza Yousaf. I'm sure if we sat and went through, different political points, there'd be, bits here and there I would disagree. I'm sure he'd be a bit more moderate or centrist than I would in quite a few issues. But I don't know. I've just always liked the guy. Like, going way back when he was quite a junior member of the cabinet, I just always thought he was quite charismatic. He has that quality in a politician that I thought that, when they say you feel as if you could have a beer with him, notwithstanding the fact that he's, a practicing Muslim, so he probably could never be around. But the point, the sentiment's the same. You know, when Nicola Sturgeon resigned, he was the first name that I thought of that I would like to see maybe run. He did run. He was by far the candidate I preferred out of the ones that ran. And yeah, like you said, Connor, there's a lot of sympathy because that same clip, you know, you'd see it pop up on TikTok time and time again, and the same, you know, when I say ignorant as in people that had no context or didn't know what it was about, just automatically run into this ridiculous conclusion that he was some anti-white racist, because obviously somebody hates white people, he's going to be, you know, elected and really popular and headed the biggest party in Scotland when most of the population's white. I mean, if you could engage in any sort of critical thinking at all, you could think, well, maybe this is not quite sounding the way it's been clipped to make it sound like. So I was disappointed when all this happened, but at the same time, I found it hard to have too much sympathy. It was such a catastrophic strategic error that he made. He was reliant on the Greens for his parliamentary majority, and he sacked them. And it seemed as if nobody thought, oh, we're now a minority and we've alienated the only party that is not actively hostile. It was such a stupid move to make that the leader of the SNP is the de facto leader of the independence movement. And I do not want somebody who's capable of making a mistake so rudimentary to be somebody that can make that mistake is not capable of making the strategic moves to win his independence. They just aren't. It's so basic. And, you know, so again, quite mixed emotions, because I did like the guy. I thought generally that he was, at least in rhetoric, was quite on the left. But, you know, a mistake of that scale just can't just be forgotten about or brushed over, and it cost him. Yeah.
When you talk about him being on the left, I also remember when he was running for the leadership election, he did describe himself as a Republican and as a socialist. I think we even talked about it in the podcast as well. I mean, I don't think, you know, I would describe myself as Republican socialist. I think I mean something quite different probably from what Humza Yousaf means. But also, it's the fact that you can say that and be a leader of a political party in a country is an illustration, I think, of the depth of political difference between Scotland and the UK as a whole, because you couldn't imagine even a leader of the Labour Party getting away with saying something along those lines without being hounded, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I thought his speech when he left was very good as well. It was very, very dignified and it was quite moving. You know, and it's nice to see politicians showing genuine emotion. I've got to say though, the dignity was not shared with the press pack. It reminded me when Nicola Sturgeon stood down, who, you know, is walking out and taking that moment and clearly in an emotional state, they're starting to screech the most ludicrous questions as if he's going to suddenly stop and turn back and start answering them. It clearly wasn't the time for that. But I don't know, the more I see of the sort of Holyrood press pack, the less time I've got for any of them.
Well, don't you worry, David. When I move to Edinburgh, I'll be your personal Holyrood correspondent, and you won't have to worry about the rest.
Sorted.
I was frustrated. A couple of things that journalists have said recently about the contest. Paul Hutchin, I don't know if you might have seen, was tweeting after John Swinney's campaign launch, and when it seemed like Kate Forbes was still going to run, saying, God, I hope, something along the lines of, God, I hope she doesn't launch it in the Highlands. I hope it's in Edinburgh. Because just they didn't want to have to travel, you know. And even before Humza Yousaf resigned, when he was trying to patch it up with the housing announcement that he made in Dundee, if you remember, he was meant to give a speech in Glasgow, he cancelled it, and then he made an appearance in Dundee. And I know that there was journalists there audibly complaining about having had to come up to Dundee because that was such an arduous journey for a national news story. Again, I mean, this is part of the reason I feel like I'm betraying something by moving to the Central Belt, because I do consider it, such a. It's not the same thing as London, but a centralising force in Scottish politics. It's not a healthy thing.
There was another thing about the speech though that I didn't like. It was when he said that he stood by that the ending the Bute House agreement was the right thing to do, and he still thought that. And I'm thinking, why? Because at no time has he ever really articulated, why it was such a necessary thing to do. And how can you still say it's necessary when it's literally cost you your job? I mean, I don't get that, and I don't get who was advising them. And like everything I said about, not wanting somebody that can make that mistake leading the independence movement, anybody that was advising them that didn't speak out against this decision should no be advising anybody on anything. I mean, it was literal parliamentary arithmetic. Did nobody add up and go, wait a minute, if we sack them, we don't have a majority in Parliament, and we've got a main opposition party in the Tories, Labour, not really any better, who at the very drop of a hat would table a vote of no confidence. I mean, they turned, as I keep saying, they turned a recycling scheme into, a culture war. If they can do that, then did they really think they weren't going to go for an easy punch when they saw that the numbers were in their favour?
I actually agree with you. I don't know why Humza didn't just wait until the Greens had their vote on the Butte House agreement, because then if they had voted then, so be it. It would have been the same outcome that he had wanted anyway. So I just think it was such a short-sighted sort of reactionary decision, and I'm sad about it.
The only thing I've kind of really heard trying to defend the decision is that the Greens are doing this, so he would look weak if he waited for them to end it. And it's like, it's such a weird macho, position or way to look at it, that, I mean, okay, if he felt as if he had to be proactive about it, he could have submitted the same thing and asked the SNP membership to have another look at the Butte House agreement, and at least then it would be run concurrently and it wouldn't have been seen as the SNP were the passive partners in this.
I don't see it as a macho move, but maybe it was. Maybe it was a bit of dominance thing. Like
just this obsession with, a leader has to look strong, and I honestly can't think of any other, and it's not much of a justification, but I can't think of any other one.
I think you're right. I think it is macho, and it's very Westminster, isn't it? Like that style of politics where it's all about what's happening behind closed doors and trying to avoid things being brought out into the open because it's kind of embarrassing to see democracy in action. I think that's the kind of logic that underpins it. And I don't know who was advising him, but certainly it's not a wise move. Although actually, I don't know about you two, but I would have encouraged my friends that were in the Greens to vote to end the agreement, largely because of the fact that I think so much of it hasn't been delivered, and I think a lot of that is to do with the UK government meddling. But I think the main thing that was binding the two parties together is independence. And if you can't actually, as a pro-independence government, deliver independence, then I think that's just phrase.
I mean, as the only Green member here, I really hadn't made my mind up. And most of the other people in the Greens that I've spoke to, that was quite a common viewpoint. I think most of them are thinking, well, there's got to be this debate, and they were there to be swayed either way. I voted against going into it in the first place. And I feel as if I'm being proven right that it could just get messy, and I couldn't see any great argument for it, any influence and concessions on the SNP government. I felt as if could be got from outside the government as well as inside. We're basically giving up 4 years worth of budget negotiations all in a one go, and I wasn't convinced we were getting 4 times what we've got. But I kind of, also part of me was thinking, now that the Greens were in it, you had to see it through. So I'm not convinced I would have voted to leave, if that doesn't sound too paradoxical. And it's fact that Patrick Harvey, I think literally the night before, had said in the radio that he was going to resign if the Greens voted against it. He was willing to put his leadership and make it a resignation issue. So for him, he'd be putting his neck out like that, and then for Humza Yousaf to turn around the next day, just unilaterally end it. It made the Green leadership look like absolute idiots. And I don't understand how he was then taken aback, how angry they were, because he'd absolutely humiliated them. They were ready to go to bat and fight their own membership to win the argument to keep this agreement, which he then just binned, seemingly. I think you were right, Debra, when you said it in a whim. It certainly came across that. He was asked at the Believe in Scotland demonstration about the Butte House agreement, and he was very warm and gave no indication that he was thinking of ending it then. So he then do it at such short notice. You know, I think one of the tweets I put out said it's like punching somebody in the face and then handing them a baseball bat. And that's exactly what he did. Because he gave the Green MSPs the perfect opportunity to get back at him for what he'd done. And if they had a majority like they had previously, even though with the Greens being involved, you could say it was still a shitty thing to do, but that's politics. Politics is a bit of a shitty business at times. To do it when you were relying on them for your majority was just idiocy. And I keep coming back to that point. I can't get over it. It's got to be the biggest cell phone in the history of Scottish politics, easily. I feel as if I've got a lot more to say about this than you do. Veteran politician John Swinney is poised to become Scotland's First Minister this week after being appointed leader of the Scottish National Party. Swinney, who led the party in the early 2000s, is expected to face a vote in Parliament as early as Tuesday. I wrote this morning and it happened this afternoon. Anyway, as he seeks to reunite the SNP and face off a rising challenge from Labour in the upcoming general election. At an event in Glasgow, he reiterated his moderate centre-left policy agenda, calling on parties in Parliament, even unionists who disagree with the SNP over independence, to work with him to find common cause as he seeks to govern as a minority administration. My focus will be the economy, jobs, and the cost of living. It will be the NHS or schools and our public services. It will be addressing the climate crisis. Connor, what's your thoughts on John Swinney?
I don't really know what to expect from Swinney. I think once we see the shape of his cabinet, which I don't think we've got any hints of yet, then we can maybe see where he wants to go policy-wise. The biggest thing I'm dreading is him putting Kate Forbes either in the role of finance secretary, which is especially bad considering her kind of economic views, but just any high-profile role, I think, is a really alarming thing because she undermines the progressive nature of the independence movement, because she is completely anathema to what I think Scotland in the 21st century should be about. By the way, I've not been a member of the Scottish Socialist Party for many years, but I did have to laugh at seeing on their website describing Kate Forbes as a wee free marketeer. It's excellent. Yeah, I think until we see the shape of the cabinet, we won't really know where he's going to go. I do worry that the signals that the SNP is sending, especially when they're talking about collaborating with other parties, is a willingness to say, you know, anything controversial we can kind of shelve. And a lot of the things that are controversial are really good. And the one that I think a lot of people are waiting to see what happens with is the housing bill, because that was such a cornerstone of the Butte House Agreement. And we are in a housing crisis in Scotland, and we do need to have a system of rent controls that is actually effective and that makes housing affordable for the majority of people in this country. There's also other reforms around housing there, like the New Deal for tenants, which means that you can have a right to a pet. So we could all have a little Heidi instead of having landlords banning them, or the right to decorate your home. I think I want to see, you know, is the housing minister currently going to stay in place, or is he going to be replaced? And if he's being replaced, I worry that that's a signal that housing policy is going to change. So I think everything's up in the air. It's kind of too early to say what it will look like, but I do think that even though Swinney is this kind of unifying candidate, and they're at pains to say this is not the SNP's not moving to the right, I do worry that there's going to be a moderation, and what we consider the sensible middle ground often is actually the defense of the status quo and all the inequality that comes with it.
Debra?
Yeah, there's not much that I would disagree with you on what you said about Kate Forbes there. I was pleased when she stepped down from the leadership race, and I think if a concession is she gets a ministerial position, it's concerning, but I'd rather she was not leader, if that makes sense. I do not want to go through that process again where all those idiots come to the forefront about gender or about, I don't know, the climate. Like, there's just so many things that I think as active political party members, you should be, yes, we want to save the planet. We want to help people who are struggling. We want to, help the minorities in our country. But I don't feel like they should be arguments. They should just be a given. And it really frustrates me when people who have, shall we say, controversial views or contrary views to that come up. It's so tedious in a sort of just in a selfish reasons. I don't want to go through it all again. I understand that there was some questions about, is it democratic to have a sort of new party leader like that? But it seems to be what's happening in parties now. I think John is really a capable guy with loads of experience, and I think he might bring a bit of brevity, if that's the right word. That might not be the right word. Like a bit of balance to the Parliament for a while. I think he's very sensible, and I think he is left. He's centre left, but on the left end of it. As you said, you don't know what it means for Scottish politics as a sort of whole. And I agree with you. I'm worried about that Overton window that keeps shifting a wee bit. And I think a lot of people within the SNP Socialists, they made it pretty clear in their letter and their statements that they are, going to keep fighting against any sort of, what's the word? My brain isn't working.
Rightward drift.
Yeah, that like any sort of drift towards the right, we're going to oppose that, and lots of people will. And there's lots of quiet lefty MSPs anyway that they won't accept things that were, I don't know. I would have thought they wouldn't have accepted it, but as you say, anything goes right now. There's no magic 8 ball telling us, and it's quite scary because normally we're thinking that the UK government is the chaotic place. I don't think we're quite there yet. We're not quite Liz Truss's PM, are we? We're not.
I mean, Humza Yousaf isn't even the shortest First Minister we've had. I actually checked. He beat Henry McLeish by quite a few months. So,
Did he? Well,
is the kind of elder statesman on the podcast? I might be the only one old enough to remember when John Swinney was the SNP leader the first time.
I was going to say that, but I was worried that would offend you.
No, it's just, unfortunately, it's just numbers. There's no getting around it. So I would have been, 18 when he became the SNP leader. And he get a lot of criticism for sort of lack of charisma was the sort of thing. He did sort of, I wouldn't say he took them right wing, but certainly in more of a kind of business friendly sort of vibe. And he then led them to their worst result since the Scottish Parliament's existence. So maybe he'll learn for that and see that even though the sort of political consensus sometimes is that, it's all about business and a bit more sort of centrist, centre right almost, that the voters, are not quite there. So maybe we'll see a different John Swinney, because 20 years is a long time. He spent nearly 10 years of that as Deputy First Minister. So in terms of competence, we probably one of the most experienced people to come into the job of First Minister. I think I would have preferred Kate Forbes stood in the election, to be honest, as much as it might not have been very pleasant for you, Debra, as an SNP member, to have that kind of fight out in the open. I think he would have beat her, and I think that would have maybe nullified her long term. She would have been a 2-time loser in leadership elections, and I think a lot of her lustre, even amongst people that supported her, might have faded. So, like in say 2 years' time, if John Swinney stood down after the next Scottish elections, she wouldn't be as well placed to sort of step in. And I think you mentioned it, Connor. I kind of fear that she'll get a cabinet position and she'll just be sort of very well positioned as a natural successor come 2026. Because it does feel as if his placeholder's a bit harsh, but it doesn't feel like a long-term leader. He seems like somebody that's in to steady the ship, get them through the next couple of years, and then pass the torch on to the next sort of generation. And I worry that next generation might be led by a wee free marketeer, as the SSP described him.
I mean, I don't feel that confident that Kate Forbes wouldn't have won if she did run. I don't know about Debra. You might have a better idea of how SNP members feel.
I honestly don't know. 50-50 from my experience talking to different members. Obviously, all the lefties that I talked to were like, no way, not Kate Forbes. But there was a lot of like older members who are socially progressive, but just seen Kate Forbes as sort of, I don't know, charismatic Highlander.
A bright young lassie. That's
Aye.
the kind of vibe some people seem to have that don't seem to want to delve into her personal politics too much.
Yeah, that was so. I'm with you, Connor. I'm not 100% convinced that it would have been a straight win there if there was a leadership contest.
I mean, I speak to SNP members who have told me, people who were backing her when she first ran, who took her at face value when she was trying to give reassurances. When she had a disastrous campaign launch, and then she was trying to backpedal on everything. Not backpedal on what she believed, but kind of downplay it. I knew a lot of people who were telling me, okay, well, that's good enough for me. And even though I may disagree with her on this and this and this, I don't think that's an impediment to her becoming First Minister. And people have a really outsized impression, I think, of how popular she is with the general public. If you look at the polling, actually, she's really popular with Tories, but I don't think that's what, that should be the criteria for being a progressive leader. But I get the feeling that there was a contest so recently means in the second contest, everything that is wrong with her views on abortion or on gender recognition or on conversion therapy, any of these things, or buffer zones, the bill that's coming up now, when we'll have to see what position she takes, all of that stuff will be seen as like that's already been dealt with. So you can't just redo it. So I think it would have less of an impact in a second campaign. And I think she would have had more of an opportunity to kind of set the agenda and the tone of it. And that's why I'm not I would have felt quite worried that actually she could have clinched it in a second go. A fantastic report in Open Democracy last year that's been doing the rounds again, actually talking about how Kate Forbes got her start in politics thanks to an anti-abortion group that was funding political internships. Really good report you should look at. And unfortunately, Open Democracy have just laid off a whole bunch of their writers, including one of the co-writers of that piece. So it's a bit of a shame because that's actually really important reporting that nobody else in Scottish journalism is doing. And we don't seem to get that kind of scrutiny of the right of the SNP. They just seem to get a free pass to say whatever they want. Actually, one thing that would be great maybe coming out of the next couple of years is if those backbenchers who are more left-wing in the SNP can maybe be as outspoken and as disruptive as the Fergus Ewings and Kate Forbeses of the party. I think that would be a really good positive development.
Yeah, the reason I think John Swinney, and maybe this is just because the likes of Stephen Flynn that was supporting John Swinney did a good job at creating this sort of narrative, that it just seems as if John Swinney was the right man in the right moment just now, like in terms of, internally the SNP were very chaotic, and the last thing they would want is another divisive figure, as, Humza Yousaf was in some respects, and Kate Forbes certainly would be. John Swinney's sort of like the boring option, which I think people in SNP want a bit of boring at the moment.
I keep hearing that phrase, the right man for right now, and it reminds me of, the thick of it, Nicola Murray. And I keep going, don't say that. I do think that John Swinney is the best of the choices that we would have had. Like, who else? Who else has the experience, the sort of knowledge? I think he's quite politically astute, and I think you're right, David. I think he will have learned from his mistakes because he's been in the game a long time. I'm trying to be super positive because I had so much worry and stress over the past week, just thinking what is going to happen, who's going to be leader. I was actually quite concerned that there was going to be a Holyrood election triggered. Like I thought the way things played out, obviously that's not came to fruition, but that I was like, what is going to happen?
I mean, I think if Kate Forbes had become First Minister or become SNP leader, then we might have had an early election because she might not have had the votes in Parliament. I mean, it was the Greens abstaining on Swinney that has made it possible for him to be First Minister in the first place. And that's obviously, I think, a sign of goodwill from the Greens, having brought down the last First Minister, not just doing it again right away, which is fair enough. But yeah, I just think, Deborah, you were saying like Swinney seems to be kind of leftish, and I think it's Scotland being a centre-left politician is kind of unremarkable. They're basically all centre-left politicians in Holyrood except for the Tories. What matters to me is whether it's a force that pushes politics to the left or pushes it to the right. And at the moment, it seems like there is a trend towards the right in Scotland. And it seems also that is where all the unionist parties want it to go. That's where the UK government wants it to go. And it is doing everything it can to structurally prevent Holyrood from doing anything differently. And so we need a really robust challenge to that. And if it doesn't come from the SNP leadership, which I'm kind of skeptical of, then there are other places it can come from, including the grassroots. And there is an opportunity, I think, because I'm hearing from loads of people in the SNP and people in the Greens as well, who want to be involved in the independence movement and they want to be pushing the Scottish government as well as the UK government. And if, the collapse of a formal Butte House agreement in the Scottish Parliament can lead to a kind of informal alliance of activists at a grassroots level, then, you know, that's not such a disaster. That could be quite a positive thing that comes out of it. So we'll see how things unfold, but remember that we all have a role we can play in changing things as well.
I've just got to say as well, you know, partly why I think John Swinney would have probably beat Kate Forbes is if you kind of look at the last contest, I can't imagine any significant Yousaf supporters crossing over to support Kate Forbes. But I think John Swinney would probably appeal to the less extreme Kate Forbes supporters. So I think starting off with that small lead that Humza Yousaf had over Kate Forbes, I think John Swinney would at very least be able to put together that same coalition and probably add to it with more, you know, centrist sort of members. There was also another challenger almost came. Did you see about that? Graham
Yes.
McCormick, a grassroots activist.
Can I just say, I think that's brilliant. I think every political party should let their ordinary members run for the leadership. I think, you know, he pulled out. What a shame, because that just would have been at least the leadership contest might have been entertaining and not so much of like the horror of, oh my God, Kate Forbes might become First Minister, and more of the fun of like, democracy is a fun thing to watch, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I felt sorry when I heard about this. I felt sorry for John Swinney because it was kind of deja vu. Because I don't know if you remember, well, probably not remember, or you might not be aware that this happened to him before in 2003. A normal activist decided to run against him for the leadership, and
I wasn't the same guy, was it?
it was not. It was a guy called Bill Wilson, who I only learned today when I was checking this, is actually now in the Greens, apparently.
Oh.
But he ran against John Swinney. He only got 14% of the vote, but
That's pretty good.
in that situation, it's like, you know, the incumbent is on an absolute hiding to nothing, because it's like, even if you get 90% of the vote, the media will go, 10% of your members would vote for literally anybody other than you. You know, and you can, until you get up to like 97, 98%, you know, you can really make that same argument with any sizable number. And it did hurt him. It sort of like put the spotlight on his leadership for, you know, weeks. And then even though he came out with a very sort of heavy win, his card was marked after that. So I would have loved to be a fly in the wall when he word that a grassroots activist was going to challenge him. He must have been like, no, this hasn't happened in 20 years.
That could be the thing that broke him.
How do you think this looks then for the SNP going forward to an imminent general election that will be due within, at the most, months? How do you think they'll do now that John Swinney's in charge? Debra?
I have to answer. I don't know how it's going to do. I think Swinney's, as we've spoke about, very experienced. He's done a few, you know, different types of campaigns. So I think if he gives us direction, we've got the activists waiting to go out and put out leaflets, knock on doors, do some canvassing. Our branch never really stops sort of campaigning anyway. We'll just up it a bit more, do some more steps. No, me personally, I don't. It's too awkward in a wheelchair. But we've even got an activist who made a special leaflet dropper thing out of wood and chopsticks. So cool. So that you can just do a flick and twist. See, efficiency.
Is that so you don't need to worry about Doug's?
Aye, Doug's and jaggy letterboxes, apparently.
We've all been there.
Does Heidi go for the fingers?
No, Heidi can't reach our letterbox. But she lets us know that there's somebody there, especially if they're Tories. She goes,
My mum's cat. My mum's cat was a nightmare for. It was a kind of chest high letterbox that would jump up and like actually grab on and stick its paw out and swipe at people.
Brilliant.
I had to apologise to several folk who answered the doorbell with their hand gushing of blood, and you're just like, sorry. And then pretend I was looking for an elastoplast that I knew wasn't there. Connor, what do you think it's got to go for the SNP?
It's going to go for the SNP. I mean, I think the Westminster election is going to be really brutal for the SNP, to be honest. And I think there's a few different reasons for that. I mean, I think the really big one is actually that there's a strong expectation that Keir Starmer is going to become Prime Minister, and that the Labour Party is really pushing this message across Britain that they are going to push out the Tories and they're going to come in. And there's a huge, I think, I don't want to say delusion because it sounds too judgmental. I think a lot of people genuinely think a Labour government is going to be a radical departure from what we're experiencing just now with the Tories. And I think certainly there's a lot of people for whom the only thing they really want is a few less scandals in government because they're kind of comfortable enough. But for the majority of people who are suffering through the cost of living crisis, it's not going to deliver. So I think that the election this year is going to be really bruising for the SNP, and the Labour Party might have a really good showing in Scotland, but I don't think that that's necessarily a permanent picture of the Scottish political landscape. I think quite possibly Labour could get in, and very quickly people could see that that is just not going to improve their lives as much as they want it to, and there could be a backlash. And my hope is that when Keir Starmer disappoints so many people, that disappointment is funneled into support for independence. Maybe it won't be quite like direct like that. Maybe it goes through a few steps, but certainly, we're reaching the end of this period where all progressive people in Scotland, for example, would be framing their politics in opposition to the Tory party, because we're not going to have a Tory government much longer. It seems all but certain that we're not going to have a Tory government. And so we have to see what kind of politics develops beyond anti-Tory politics. And, maybe we can have a pretty broad consensus in Scotland against the continuing Toryism of Starmer. But certainly I think that's all about what might happen after the election. And I think what's actually going to happen in the election is it's very hard for me to see the trend reversing, where, I think Labour could well get more seats than the SNP.
I think I'm a bit more optimistic than you two for the SNP's chances. I think the UK media still don't quite get that normal election rules don't really apply in Scotland the same way. There's a much larger percentage of electorate here that are entrenched. The pool of swing voters is a lot smaller. And it always felt, even when it was looking at its worst for the SNP at times, I thought there's still get that solid vote that is not going to just switch to Labour because of independence, because that's what they're motivated by. So I always felt as if they would lose seats, certainly. I don't think Starmer's Labour Party will get the same kind of surge here that they look as if they're going to get in England. So that will blunt it a bit. The Tories will collapse, and most of the Tory seats, the SNP, are in second place. So I could see a scenario where Labour takes seats off the SNP, but it balances out because the SNP inherit the Tory seats. So I always thought the SNP would probably still come out with the most MPs, but it would be spun as Humza Yousaf's SNP disastrous result, because we've had this chaos, and the narrative is the chaos that the SNP are now in absolute almost terminal decline. The expectations are lowered so much that I think they might end up delivering a similar result, but because of the lowered expectations, it'll be seen as John Swinney steadied the ship and pulled a draw out of the jaws of defeat sort of thing. But I suppose we'll see sooner rather than later.
Well, I'll say, I think the biggest question, I'm predicting what the SNP result will be like just based on the political trend, but I also don't really know what the SNP campaign message is going to be. And there's been, of course, now such a long time of discussing what is the SNP's independence strategy and how does that relate to the election, and a bit of kind of mixed messaging about, if we win a majority of seats or if we win a majority of votes, then it's a mandate for something, is a negotiation or referendum, sometimes kind of unclear. I'm waiting to see what Swinney actually puts forward as his interpretation of this independence strategy, because it will make a difference. But also, I think a couple of years ago, it would have been easier to run on a platform of vote SNP for Scotland to become an independent country, as the message has been summed up. Because I think now there is a credibility issue where people know it's not really going to be that straightforward, and they know that if the SNP ekes out a narrow majority of seats or votes or whatever they say the threshold will be, that Starmer's probably going to ignore it. And that's a credibility issue for the independence movement as a whole, is that we need to have an answer to how we continue to build political pressure that goes beyond just, keep the faith and keep voting for a political party. That's like the question for the independence movement, really. But I think it makes a difference to the general election campaign, because if the SNP back off independence altogether and they say this is about the cost of living crisis, this is about calling out the fact that the Labour Party can't deliver on solving it, maybe there's some leeway there. If they double down on independence and go really, really hard and try and persuade people this is it, this is the moment, then that might also have an outcome that's hard to predict. But if it's this kind of confused thing that's been going on, that's been discussed for a while, then I think that will fall flat.
I think also the SNP are like a election winning machine, and I just feel as if Swinney taking charge now has sort of created a bit of a siege mentality and a refocus of the SNP. And I just think that the Labour Party have underestimated that so many times, where they keep thinking that they're just going to sweep back into power in Scotland, and they've been thinking it for over a decade now. And I'm not convinced that this has got to be any different from some of the other times.
I think you're right there with Labour's sort of attitude. They've got that sort of early 2000s idea of, well, in Scotland, they're going to vote for a Labour Prime Minister. Like they've got, because that's what we did do in Scotland. You would vote SNP locally and then vote for Labour for, like, I know that was my first vote ever when I was 18, because that's what my ma told me that you were meant to do. And I think a lot of commentators, especially who we end up getting our news from, they've got this sort of London-centric view of Scottish politics. So I think he's all right. But I do think that Swinney is maybe going to come at this from a wee bit of a different angle, and I'm hoping that his reputation internationally might have some influence in the strategy and how we're going to actually achieve independence. And I'm hoping, conference is coming soon, so I'm hoping that there's a lot more talk there about what was passed last conference, which I didn't really agree with, which was to fight the next election as a de facto referendum. But the pragmatics of that is just what? Like, how are you meant to do that? But the new slogan, Swinney's campaign, Unite for Independence. So I definitely think it's going to be at the forefront of whatever message we end up selling.
I think it is. It's the best way of getting the SNP activists and members to circle the wagons is to go full independence in terms of rhetoric, even if you've not got a clue what you're doing the day after the election. But you're right, Connor. It is about credibility. It's like if they played that card one too many times, and I don't think we'll know that until election night. Normally, I'd say a word from our sponsor, but we're currently looking for a new sponsor at the moment. So if you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, please get in touch in any of our social media channels.
Put some sort of like AI voice changing thing on it. You sound like someone else.
Neil was doing something with that, wasn't he?
I don't know what Neil's doing.
The results are in from the council elections across England in the last big test of public opinion before a general election. It was a bad night for the Tories as they fell into third place in numbers of seats nationally, as well as losing Blackpool South by-election to Labour. The Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party of England and Wales all saw big increases in seats, while George Galloway's Workers' Party picked up 4 seats and the Reform Party picked up only 2 seats. So, Debra, any takeaways from the results for you?
No, I don't really think that the result is because Labour are doing brilliant. I just think it's because the Tories are so awful. Like I'm not really all that impressed. I thought the Greens did the Bristol, it's now all Green councillors. Did I misread that?
I think they've got control, yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool. A really good result for them. Labour lost some seats, didn't they, because of their wishy-washy, woolly, pathetic stance on Palestine. So voters let you know what you're doing wrong. So I hope they listen.
Well,
yeah, it's always fun to see the Tories get trounced, so I suppose I had enjoyed that. But yeah, I think the thing that bears examination is how did the candidates that were challenging Labour from the left do, and there were those from the Green Party and various independents who did quite well in some areas challenging Labour from the left. And all of that has got to do with the shameful position that they've taken on Gaza. There was also, I think, some broader challenges. So, for example, there was all the mayoral elections.
Yeah.
In the Northeast, Jamie Driscoll, who was excluded from the Labour selection process, kind of bureaucratically, he came second, and there was actually quite a significant margin. I think his campaign had been really optimistic about his chances, and in fact, he was probably the perfect candidate for that kind of left of Labour milieu, because it was a very moderate campaign. He was stressing that he has all these links with the community. He wanted to work with local businesses, but he also wanted to tackle inequality. So he was kind of the mainstream social democratic candidate challenging the Labour Party and saying, I don't have the baggage of Starmer's Labour Party, and still a distant second. And I think that to me illustrates that where some of these challenges are succeeding at a local level, when you go a bit higher up, it's a lot more difficult. And I think it's hard to extrapolate council elections into the general election, but to me, that says that maybe the impact's going to be felt the strongest at the most local level, where it's easier for challengers. Whereas when you get to the general election, I don't know how strongly it will be felt. David, you also mentioned the Workers' Party of Britain, so I do feel compelled to say I think that's such a depressing development in the left of British politics that Galloway is a political figure again, is a total charlatan as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure people have seen also his appearance recently in Navarra, where he outed himself as, he denies being a homophobe, but you can listen to his comments and you can make your own judgment. And I certainly have. So I wish maybe we've seen a better left. But fortunately, I think, it's not a party that exists in any meaningful way in Scotland, and hopefully that remains the case.
Yeah, I'm always kind of in two minds. You don't like to see, I've got no love for George Gallagher whatsoever. But part of me always thinks if he's doing well down in England, at least he might leave us alone up here and not get himself involved in Scottish politics. The fact,
he had a
though,
kind
that
of unofficial truce with the SNP, by the way, when Humza Yousaf was leader. I don't know if you saw that, but in the news, he said the SNP are, so correct on Gaza that I'm going to not attack the SNP. I don't know if that'll change now.
and he stands, as much as you can criticise a lot of things, you can't criticise his stance in Gaza. He's been very consistent over decades in that. But the fact that his party out of nowhere is double the amount of seats that the Reform Party have got, with spokes, everybody's mentioned that it's ludicrous the amount of coverage, UKIP, Brexit, now Reform, the same outfit in different guises, the amount of media attention and coverage they get for their influence and their does not reflect the reality. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed this. Every single political TikTok I ever see, the comments are full of people saying they're voting Reform. And clearly that isn't reflected when they go to the ballot box. So there is something dodgy going on TikTok there with that.
Or they all forgot their voter ID, like Boris Johnson.
Yeah, maybe that's it. I mean, are you suggesting the average Reform voter might be thick? I mean, that's quite a small step to make.
Oh.
I think it's a fake political party. Nobody actually votes for it. It's just one of these things that the media can quote and bring on when they need to. They're like, oh, this panel really needs to balance to the right a bit.
Yeah, this panel that's already an extreme right-wing Labour MP, 2 Tories, an ex-Tory. What they really need to balance that to the right is Nigel Farage or Richard Tice. That's how the BBC particularly seem to operate these days. The fact that the Tories wind up third, it makes you think, like, the opinion polls have been horrendous for the Tories for a long time now, but it really is starting to look as if we could have some kind of generational defeat for the Tories, which, you love to see it, but it is blunting with the fact that the party in waiting have fashioned themselves into the new Tories. I think I put out a tweet that I was very, very proud of for its eloquence, was that Toryism isn't facing extinction, it's just migrated to the Labour Party. And that's exactly what's happening. You listen to Starmer, he's indistinguishable from something. I mean, in fact, he's coming out with things David Cameron would probably have been to the left of him on. When you think back to David Cameron's general election campaign, before he became Prime Minister, all this stuff about Hug a Hoodie and, going to the North Pole about the environment. You couldn't imagine Starmer coming out with something as liberal or wishy-washy left-wing as that. You just couldn't see it. So, the fact that the Labour Party is now to the right of the Tories were 15 years ago is, certainly at least takes the shine off the possible annihilation of the actual Conservative Party.
Sorry, I've not got much more to say in it. I just get really bored with English news.
Also, I was going to say, David, you always told me there's no international news on this podcast, so contradicting yourself.
Until we get a independence referendum, domestic does include the rest of this island. If and when we get independence, I will happily stop talking about anything south of Galloway.
I was making notes at the start and I never wrote anything else other than in your introduction, David. I wrote down cat piss. That's all I've got.
That could be the name of the pod.
I was going to say, there's the title. That's the title of the podcast right there. I love it when these organic names sort of just pop up. Well, thanks for joining us again, listeners. You can find all our podcasts at leftungagged.org, as well as written articles. You can sign up for our free newsletter. And if you've got anything you'd like us to talk about, you can tweet us at _ungagged, hashtag HolyrudeUngagged, or drop us an email, ungaggedleft@gmail.com, putting Holyrude Ungagged in the subject line. And if you want to get to know us a bit more, you can also join our Signal group. We've got quite a thriving community now where you can chat to all of us and get involved. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please give us 5 stars in whatever podcast platform you use. Until then, have fun, be good, and be lucky.
Bye.
Bye.
I just just wanted to show you I miss you and hold up a mirror and let you see the